Support for the Legislative Gazette comes from United University Professions, representing 37,000 academic and professional employees at SUNY campuses and teaching hospitals across New York State. Frederick E. Cole, President. UUPinfo.org.
The Trump administration and the EPA this month announced a major environmental policy change. The federal government will no longer regulate greenhouse gas emissions from cars. Now, a Long Island lawmaker and a cadre of environmental advocates from New York and beyond are vowing to fight back against what they call a devastating blow for climate protections. We get more from the New York Public News Network's Desiree Diorio.
The temperature hovered around freezing as Congressman Tom Suozzi of Long Island gathered with environmental advocates in Glen Cove, right on the water's edge where Hempstead Bay slices into Garvey's Point Preserve.
We have to wake up. This is very real, serious business. This is affecting the quality of your life. We here on Long Island, the waterfront right by here, we're subject to the effects of rising sea levels.
That very real serious business Suozzi's talking about is the Trump administration's announcement last week erasing the so-called endangerment finding from 2009, linking emissions to harmful health effects. It's the scientific foundation behind the federal government's legal authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. Without it, environmentalists say passenger cars and trucks will no longer be subject to virtually any federal fuel efficiency standards. This kind of deregulation is one of the primary goals that President Donald Trump and his EPA administrator Lee Zeldin said they wanted to accomplish at the beginning of Trump's second term. In remarks last week, Zeldin said eliminating the endangerment finding is the single largest act of deregulation in U.S. history.
It regulated and targeted the American dream. And now the endangerment finding is hereby eliminated, as well as all greenhouse gas emission standards that followed. The red tape has been cut. Manufacturers will no longer be burdened by measuring, compiling, or reporting greenhouse gas emissions for vehicles and engines.
Zeldin says the move will make cars cheaper and lower costs for families, especially those who live in rural areas where personal vehicles are all but required. He says the EPA never had the authority to regulate air pollutants in the first place.
If Congress wants EPA to regulate the heck out of greenhouse gases emitted from motor vehicles, then Congress can clearly make that the law, which they haven't done, for good reason. Today, we dismantle the tactics and legal gymnastics used by the Obama and Biden administrations to backdoor their ideological agendas on the American people.
For Zeldin and the climate activists opposing him, the EPA's authority comes down to different interpretations of the decades-old Clean Air Act. Zeldin, who formerly represented Eastern Long Island in the U.S. House of Representatives, says the act does not permit limitations on greenhouse gas emissions. The Natural Resources Defense Council says the opposite. Pete Budden is the NRDC's senior advocate for hydrogen, climate, and energy. He says the EPA is violating the Clean Air Act.
Greenhouse gas emissions are a danger to the public. They are a threat to our public health, our safety, and therefore they should be regulated under the Clean Air Act. And it's as simple as that.
So, the NRDC filed a lawsuit in federal court Wednesday to keep the endangerment finding in place. Budden says it's an environmental and economic imperative as intense weather events occur more frequently and on a larger scale.
Trump and Zeldin are asking you to ignore the rising costs that we're all facing in our wallets. Not only the cost of recovering from these disasters, Sandy alone caused an estimated $65 billion in damages, but the rising cost of energy prices and homeowners insurance.
Long Island is fourth on the list of most vulnerable places in the country due to climate change, according to market rating agency Moody's. That's why Tom Suozzi says he's building a coalition of lawmakers who would support legislation to clarify and strengthen the Clean Air Act. On Long Island, I'm Desiree Diorio for the New York Public News Network.
You are listening to the Legislative Gazette, a program about New York State government and politics. I'm David Gustina. This week I sat down with Assemblyman Patrick Carroll, a Democrat from Rockland County, to talk about recent immigration and customs enforcement operations in the lower Hudson Valley.
Well, David, it's a very complicated issue. I don't think there's anyone out there who thinks that we shouldn't have secure borders. We want secure borders. And I don't think there's anyone out there who thinks that, criminals and those with arrest warrants and otherwise need to be, taken into custody by ICE and other authority figures. That said, I think the abuses are what we really want to send a message against. Those of us in the Hudson Valley, whether it be Rockland or Orange County, just want to make sure that the rule of law and due process are followed. So I think that we need to keep tabs on all of these potential locations for ICE facilities, what they're doing there, what they intend. Last time I checked, our borders are on the Canadian border and Mexico. I'm not sure why we have this uprising of all these facilities around us. I will say, though, I do support local law enforcement. I think they do a great job. As I mentioned at my opening statements, here in Rockland live in one of the safest communities, and that's attributable directly to our great local law enforcement.
Yeah, there are these agreements, right? There's a 287G, something like that local communities can make to basically become an arm of the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We've seen up here, I believe it's Rensselaer County has done that. Are you for that, against that? Would you like to see local law enforcement do their own work? Governor Hochul is expounded on this, is let them do their own police work. ICE, you do your work. Don't be, basically using our resources.
Again, I think our local police resources need to be focused on our local issues and keeping our local residents safe. I think if these federal agencies want to come in to our communities, they need to do it themselves. Again, if there's a situation where there's actual people with, judicial warrants or an arrest warrant out there, certainly,
Right.
I know they work together, but I wouldn't want to encourage further cooperation, being as though it doesn't seem, based upon a national view, that these agencies, in particular, is following the rule of law. Fourth Amendment issues, the due process, I'm not really sure what's going on, but we want to make sure people in my district don't really have that problem.
We're speaking with New York State Assemblyman Patrick Carroll. He's a Democrat who represents the 96th district on Rockland County. Now, just two more questions on this, then we'll move on. One is the masks. Should these ICE people be wearing masks? Is that American?
It does not seem to be. It's amazing. The folks who are wearing masks as they patrol with ICE are probably the same folks who had a huge problem putting on masks back during the COVID outbreak. I think that people who are in law enforcement capacity should be identifiable. They should have badges, badge numbers, and they should be able to be, there needs to be transparency. They need to be, know who it is, know what their background is. You don't want to interfere with anyone doing their official duties. Don't want to, create any situation where anyone is put in unnecessarily in jeopardy. But, they should not have masks on when they're doing this work.
Also safe places. We've seen the attempts, people guarding schools so ICE won't come in and raid schools. You have churches, places of worship. You have even courthouses where people are having their cases adjudicated and trying to get in there and get what they consider illegal immigrants. Are you concerned about having these safe spaces?
Am I concerned that we need to have them? I think that
Yes.
people should be able to go to school and be safe. People should be able to go to their religious services, be safe, go and participate in our judicial system. Hypothetical, if someone who was worried about their immigration status because ICE was patrolling outside a courtroom was a witness to another crime, aren't we making our society more unsafe if that person can't testify in court because they fear repercussions from the ICE officer outside the door? So, yes, I think we need safe spaces. God, help our community if a child goes to school and is deported out of his or her classroom while our parents are working. We're better than that, and our community deserves better than that.
Yeah, finally, protesters. We've been seeing this attempt to label them as domestic terrorists, even saying they're paid. And I don't understand. I always thought the single most important right is to petition your government to protest in America.
100% agree. I've always been a big supporter of the First Amendment. I think that's what, that and other amendments in the Constitution is what makes our country here celebrating his 250th birthday. Great. I think people have the right to protest. People need to be safe, and it can't be a violent protest or anything like that. But if we can't share our views on our government and our officials and how it's going, then really, again, what's the point of all of this? We need to have protected speech, and protesting is one of those avenues for protected speech.
All right. Patrick Carroll, Democrat of the 96th District, joining us this week on the Capital Connection. The federal government is impacting the states, and particularly New York, in so many ways. I'll pick one to ask you about. The environment. We've just seen the EPA, the former congressman, Lee Zeldin, right, who has just basically deregulated a regulatory agency, the EPA, and come out with the removal of this dangerous warning. This has to do with greenhouse gas emissions, and called the single largest deregulatory action in history. But won't this ultimately threaten the health of New Yorkers?
I agree with you, David. I think that, the federal government, the ideal federal government is one that creates consistency and uniformity across the states for things like, whether it be, drugs, prescription drugs, the, EPA, FDA, things like that. This deregulation is ultimately going to come and hurt New Yorkers. I'm not sure why we've left science and looking to, proven research about the harmful effects of greenhouse gases and other emissions. But we need to get back there, because I think some of the damage we will be doing and continue to do because of this deregulation are going to be felt by my children and my children's children.
Yeah, then there's health care, obviously. We're worried about those cuts, and this is a huge...
Medicaid reimbursements, SNAP benefits. 30% of people in Rockland County are living with food insecurity. They're not sure where their next meal will be coming from, and we're only getting worse in funding for those assistance programs. The issue is the state government can certainly fill some of the holes,
right,
but we can't fill all of the holes, and, we need our federal officials to represent us.
Yeah, well, it was interesting to me that back when Richard Godfrey was the head of the well-known Richard Godfrey, long time legislative, in fact, one of the longest serving at one point, head of the health committee, said, we have the votes for universal health care in New York. And yet it just seems that that's never going to happen, even with the Democrats in power. I
think there's a lot of special interests, I would imagine. I think that the goal should be universal health care. I think in a civilized society, we all deserve it. I have a brother who lives in Europe, and he just kind of, when he comes to visit, he talks about the programs they have. For example, he lives in the Netherlands. He doesn't have children, but he talks about how when someone does have a child, there's a year of, bonding and time given to the parents. There's nurses who are brought in, all paid for by the government. And, I'm not sure if we're going to get there, but I think that, getting basic good health care for all of our residents free of charge is a goal that we all should be striving for.
That's Democratic State Assemblyman Patrick Carroll. You were listening to the Legislative Gazette, a program about New York State government and politics. I'm David Guistina. This year marks the 100th anniversary of what is now known as Black History Month, and Black lawmakers and other lawmakers of color in Albany are using the month to highlight key priorities like more education funding, affordable housing, and progress on issues like sentencing reform. Samuel King with the New York Public News Network reports from Albany.
The Legislative Conference of the New York State Association of Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislators, otherwise known as Caucus Weekend, brings people from all over New York State to Albany for a packed weekend of networking events, parties, and policy discussions. Assembly Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes of Buffalo had a reminder for the crowd gathered at an opening night reception.
So it's more than about the party. It's more than about the party. It's about the policy. For the people who we love and depend on us.
The roots of the caucus and the association date back 60 years to 1966. That's when Black and Puerto Rican lawmakers took what became known as the Midnight Walk to then Speaker Anthony Travia's office to demand more power in the legislature. They later received key leadership and committee assignments, including on the powerful Ways and Means Committee. According to a history of the caucus, members held up the state budget in 1975 until they received more benefits for Black and Latino communities. More than 50 years later, both the Speaker of the Assembly and the Senate Majority Leader are black. Speaker Carl Hastie says it's still important to remember the legacy of those past members.
Even though we have many more legislators of color and the two legislative leaders are, of course, of color, but it's really about the importance of how the government should be doing and providing services and looking out for the communities of color. So this weekend is always going to be important.
Assemblymember Micael Solage of Long Island is chair of the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Caucus. She says the timing of caucus weekend is no coincidence, as it falls in the heart of state budget discussions.
Policy can't be done in a silo. It has to be done collaboratively. And so when we talk about the various issues, it's important that these, people take it back and tell their neighbors that we need your help to get these policies down to the finish line.
Black lawmakers used the weekend to highlight some key priorities, including a $2 billion increase in foundation aid for schools, legislation targeting foreclosure prevention and homeowner stabilization, and sentencing and parole reforms. And groups relish the chance to advocate for their priorities. Zakia Shakir Ansari is co-executive director of the Alliance for Quality Education. She says it's important to ensure lawmakers allocate enough funding to make a difference in communities.
The money has to be enough to make the change, and that's across the board, from housing to health care to education. And if we fund it right, fund it equitably, it will impact the Black and brown community. And that's when it impacts them for the better, it will absolutely impact everybody else for the better, including the state.
Dr. Shawnell Hawkins is president and CEO of the Urban League of Rochester. She says workforce development continues to be a top issue.
This is really important that there are dollars that continue to support that, but also on housing. We want to make sure that there's a clear pathway to support affordable housing. That is certainly our work. And of course, access to continue to prioritize Black and brown New Yorkers. That is always going to be our work. We want to make sure everybody has a pathway for economic success, but we still want to make sure that remains the focus.
The legislature returns to Albany next week with some of those priorities on the agenda just more than a month before the state budget is due. In Albany, I'm Samuel King for the New York Public News Network.
For 90 years, YMCAs throughout New York have participated in a youth and government program, giving students a chance to get hands-on civic education. This year, that program has come to the Saratoga area for the first time. As the Legislative Gazette's Aaron Schiller-Levine reports, it's being run by a man who has experienced the benefits firsthand.
Ben McNutt is an alum of the YMCA's Youth and Government program. He says he wouldn't be the same person had he not participated in it during high school.
It's a program that meant a lot to me, to my development. I met some of my lifelong friends through the program.
Started in Albany in 1936, the program has since spread across the country and has more than 900 New York participants this year. After attending college in Washington, D.C., McNutt returned to the Capital Region this summer, in part to help run the Saratoga Regional YMCA's first youth and government program.
So students get together in a small group. They write a bill of significance to their state or to their local area, and the students actually get to travel to the New York State Capitol in Albany during the state conference in March. And we are the only student group actually in the state that is allowed to use the state legislative chambers.
During the program, youth create and pitch their own pieces of legislation, but if they aren't interested in the legislative process, McNutt says they've got options.
There's a press program, where they learn interview skills, photo and written journalism and things like that. There's a judicial program, which is kind of, mock appeals, where, the students come together, they kind of write a mock brief and, present in front of students, who are kind of serving on a mock panel of judges.
Drew Caldwell is the director for YMCA Youth and Government in New York.
The thing that I always want to encourage people to understand is this is not the future politicians of America. It's a YMCA program, so it's based around community. It's all about the concept of bringing students together to discuss a variety of issues, focusing on one issue at a time without any parties or partisanship, just discussing their ideas as young people.
And it's not all just for educational purposes. McNutt says a number of student-proposed bills have ended up before the actual New York State Assembly over the past 9 decades.
We have an elected youth governor as well, who has to kind of sign or veto. And so the bills that are actually passed and signed by the youth governor are actually sent on to the state legislature. There are 80 New York state laws that are currently on the books that are a result of student proposals from this program. And so the reason that the New York State Senate uses iPads for their legislative work instead of stacking up giant stacks of paper in the chamber is because of a student proposal from our program in one of the past years.
Charlie Hughes is a senior at Saratoga Springs High School. His bill would change New York's primary voting process.
What I'm proposing is that someone can vote regardless of their party affiliation in the primaries for one candidate per each position. So, for example, someone who's in the Prohibition Party, just to use a placeholder, they can vote for a Democratic governor in the primary for governor, and then they can vote in the Republican primary for lieutenant governor.
He adds the bill is inspired by countries with more parliamentary-style elections.
The way I see it, a primary should be sort of like a first round of an election, and in theory, that's what they are right now, but what we're seeing is that more and more people, especially in New York State, aren't identifying with either major party, which means they're effectively disenfranchised from taking part in that earlier round of elections.
McNutt says the program can help enfranchise the next generation of government leaders. In part, that can come by introducing students to an exchange of ideas without the strife often associated with political dialogue.
People ask, is this a politics program? I tell them, it's not a program about politics. There's nothing political to me, about wanting to, work together, do research and talk about how we can solve the problems, for our friends and for our neighbors and for members of our community.
This year's program culminates with a 3-day legislative session beginning March 20th. For the Legislative Gazette, I'm Aaron Shello-Levine.
You were listening to the Legislative Gazette, a program about New York State government and politics. I'm David Gustina. Birders from around the world recently participated in the Great Backyard Bird Count. It's an annual event during which birders help ornithology researchers by logging the species they find in their area. This year, birders logged over 8,000 different birds from Zambia to Vietnam to the U.S. The Legislative Gazette's Sajina Shrestha followed a group of birders in the Albany Pine Bush Preserve to learn more about how the count helps birders connect.
No, it's okay. Yes, I am here for the bird count.
Yeah. Do you need a pair of binoculars?
I do.
Okay, so
I'm sorry.
At the Albany Pine Bush Preserve, the birders set off along one of the trails, quietly trudging through the snow. The bird count is a chance for some birders to be part of a larger birding community and learn more about the practice. Preeti Arani has been bird watching for the last 20 years.
I love birds. If I see a bird in the morning, it just makes me happy. They just seem to be doing their thing.
Arani often bird watches alone. However, for this year's bird count, the Niskayuna resident decided to take a chance and meet others who share the hobby.
I've never done this in a group, so I'm actually learning from Alex. I'll go. At home, actually, we see quite a few. Here, it's kind of quiet today.
Alex Soldo is the field ecologist and entomologist at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve. She leads the group through the trail, stopping every so often to talk to the birders about the environment and show them different bird calling techniques.
Psh, 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 psh. That's fishing. I once had a professor do that for like 30 minutes to try to bring in barred owls, and eventually it worked, but we were all like, oh my God.
Beyond just logging and observing birds together, the count also gives birders a chance to help with scientific research. The information collected during the long weekend goes into a database that is used by ornithologists to learn more about bird migration and other ecological factors. Based at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, Becca Rodomsky-Bish is the project leader for the Great Backyard Bird Count. She says, like a canary in the coal mine, birds can be great indicators.
Well, birds can really do that in our landscapes every day, too. If we see birds, if we don't see birds, that helps tell us something about the environment and what's going on. And so it's really been interesting to see how researchers have expanded their use of this data set to begin to understand even larger ecological and environmental questions.
Back at the Albany Pine Bush Preserve, the birders are coming to the end of their trail, and Soldo is making a log of all the birds they saw in the database.
So we're logging 1 white-breasted nuthatch and 3 red-breasted, 1 blue jay, and then 2 black-capped chickadees.
Although the birders did not observe that many feathered creatures on this day, Arani says she really appreciated the time spent with fellow birders.
So it was fun. It's just you learn something in a group, how other people do things. I think that teaches you how you could do things differently.
She says she'll be using what she learned in her future birding adventures.
So maybe go out a little bit more in the mornings and open my Merlin so I can identify. Like I said, right now we're getting a lot of birds on our bird feeder, so I'm kind of filling it every morning. It'll be, I know usually spring is an exciting time because you get a lot of the migratory birds. So I guess that's what I'll do. I'll just go and listen more.
For the Legislative Gazette, I'm Sajina Shrestha.
And that about does it for this week's show. The Legislative Gazette is a production of WAMC, Northeast Public Radio. We had help from the New York Public News Network. You can listen anytime at WAMCpodcast.org or anywhere you get your podcast. Look for program number 2608. And join us again next week at this same time for more news on New York State government and politics. For the Legislative Gazette, I'm David Gustina.
Support for the Legislative Gazette comes from United University Professions, representing 37,000 academic and professional employees at SUNY campuses and teaching hospitals across New York State. Frederick E. Cole, President. UUPinfo.org.